we are live. Welcome to the show, folks. I am Maximo, your host. I use pronouns he, him, his. I'm excited to be here tonight because we got another fabulous Tuesday in store for you because we have a couple of people here who promise to excite and entertain for the masses tonight. Wherever you're watching from, chime in. Let us know. Give us a comment, like, share, comment, subscribe, all that stuff because we got a great show tonight. And I'm so excited to introduce the prestigious panel. Should I say, right? Maybe.
Sure.
Maybe
Yeah,
we got a great group here for you tonight. We've been talking about a lot of things before the cameras came on. Thank you for being with us. Shout out to Island Jackson here at VodPod. Just all around chingon, dare I say? We're gonna get right into that. We're gonna get right into it. We're gonna get right into the word chingon and chingona, the two words, in just a moment. But we've got to also introduce Dr. Andrea. I just got to say, Dr. Andrea, that's got a nice ring to it.
I agree.
So we're going to be addressing her as Dr. Andrea because she's got all the goods, all the news. The doc is in the house tonight. So let's jump right in because we got into this discussion. I don't like being called chingon either. Okay. I really don't because I think it's like, man, why do we got to be this tough, puffing out our chest, ultra toxic masculine type of thing? We should be more just want to be ourselves. We should just want to be ourselves. We don't have to be this badass. So if you're watching right now, give us your comments. What do you think about the term chingon and chingona? Do you believe that's like something we should embrace? Do you think it's something that's cool, that's hip, it's in? Do you agree or disagree? Let's start there tonight, folks.
Yeah, so I think we started this conversation because I think that the word chingona gets tossed around a lot, at least in my environment, among my group of either people I'm professionally or socially connected with, or like, she's a chingona, you get a chingona, everybody's a chingona, which I think, generationally, my grandmother would hate to be called a chingona. It's a very bad name to call a woman. In the current context, meaning like badass, bad bitch, yeah, she's a baddie, like she's like a boss. But I think not necessarily that it's like a vulgar word to call a woman, but in order to really be, for me to call myself a chingona, I feel like it's got to be earned. There's a certain level of accomplishment and grit and toughness that comes along with that is not just like, oh yeah, I finished this project, I'm a chingona. It comes with experience and age and maturity, and I feel like I've done a lot in my life, and I don't think I'm there yet.
See, but that's maybe a little bit humble of you if you put it in those terms, because we already talked about you have your PhD, you've earned your PhD, you're a mother of 4, you've ran a marathon, at least one, you're training for another one, and you want to start doing ultra marathons, and so you do hard shit like you just explained.
I like to do hard things, yeah.
Difficult things to challenge yourself.
Yeah.
So you still wouldn't say that you could identify as a chingona?
No. And I have my very good friend, Liz Letts, who's the executive director of the Health Collaborative. She's like, because I told her the same thing. Yeah, shout out to Liz.
That's where I remember you.
Oh,
so
really?
y'all did meet.
Health Collaborative.
Yeah.
Woo, woo, Health Collaborative. Yeah, we were having this conversation, and she was like, oh, I don't agree with that word. And I thought it was more like a generational thing. She's like, no, my grandmother raised like 17 kids, and she was like a farmer. And like, we don't rise to the level of the adversity that some of our ancestors
That's
did.
True.
So with the things we've accomplished with lots of privilege and lots of resources that they didn't have. So I tend to agree more with Liz. I mean, would I love to be a chingona? I aspire to chingona, but I think too many of us claim it a little too prematurely.
I mean, like, so when we talk about like the definitions, right? Like the definition of chingon or chingona, right, is a big person, right? We're talking about not just, we're talking about either a wide person or a very tall person. And, someone who is, like, say, in my culture, the nickname for a chingona, right, was supposed to be, the biggest cousin or the biggest person that was in your circle, right? Like, if you had, a circle of gangsters, for example, like, the biggest one would be El Chingon, right? They would give him that nickname, right? Which means he could either take a lot of punches, or maybe he's, like, if he was the guy that was chosen as a running back in a football game, like, he would hit harder, that kind of thing, right? But so now folks are using that as a term for just as a term for being able to say like that they have accomplished a lot of things, right? Of course, the word chingon is a cuss word, right? It's a cuss word that was used in a slang type of way. And so now we're starting to appropriate or even bring back these cuss words. And I'm like, cool with it, because I'm in my mental decolonization, you know, the English language can get challenged in that kind of way. You know, it's a colonizer language, and I don't mind challenging it by cussing all the time. But there is a edge of respectability that I think our ancestors and our grandparents and our parents still don't align with the words chingon. So sometimes I feel like it's a generational thing. But on that same level, right, I was just thinking about this as you were speaking this, because for some of our young folks who are really dealing with mental wellness, you know, sometimes not smoking a cigarette every hour is a big deal, or sometimes not drinking a 12-pack but just drinking 11 sodas, you know, is an accomplishment for some people. So they want to use the words chingon to be able to help them to go to that next level of wellness. And I am okay with people taking on things in order for their mental and their personal wellness, but then I want them to aspire, like the Dr. Andrea, to go harder, to go bigger, and I think I always tell people, as a former person who struggled with addiction, poco a poco, day by day, one day at a time, right? And we know that as people who train for running and people who train for wellness and who do exercises, you know, you don't just hit the track, right? You don't just do 8 miles. You know, you started off with running or walking or walking 30 minutes, it might be less than a mile. And if you had pains in your body and that went away through your walking, you did it slowly but surely. And so, you know, I always think about that as I'm hitting the gym, right? You see some folks in there who are like huge, you know, women and men, they have their bodies super fit. And then you see them the next day and you're just like, man, you know, this person, how long did it take him to get there, right? And, you know, you don't know that story, but what you're seeing is what's happening at the moment. But poco a poco, dude.
Yeah.
Little bit by little, you know?
Yeah. And I'm all about empowering people using what they can. And as you just mentioned and alluded to, you know, the pyramids of Chichen Itza weren't built in a day, right? Mm-hmm. Little by little, if that's what you need to empower yourself to get to the next level, you know, to do the next thing, right? To get to graduate from high school, then you go to a community college, then you graduate from a 4-year university, so on and so forth. Absolutely. I just think, as we've alluded to, these terms chingon and chingona are overused, and we're giving everybody a sticker because you want to be a badass. And it's like, okay, my thing is though, as a man though, it's like,
trophy.
Yeah. It's like, well, we just want to be like these big tough people. It's like, well, wait a minute, I just want to be me. You know, we've talked about, you know, toxic masculinity and guys coming out here and, you know, I'm the top dog, you know, I'm the top person in charge, whatever it is. And not in that language, but it's like, why can't I just be me? Why can't I be a softer, gentler, kinder human rather than being this chingon? It's like, well, you know, our people, like you mentioned, our ancestors have overcome a lot of stuff and they weren't going around, hey, I'm chingona, right? Yeah. They just did it, right? They rose to the occasion. And I think that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, they were just living their lives. They just thought it's survival at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But you know, at this point, for some people, identity is everything. You know, we were just talking about this with some of my friends. You know, the term Latinx. You know, and some people are even Chicanx and using the terms Chicano, Chicana, Chicanx, Latin, Latina, Latinx, Latino. You know, some people, you know, especially during Hispanic Heritage Month, we're like using these terms as opposed to using the word Hispanic, which comes from, you know, more present day colonizer. And so, like, you know, people were like, well, what we've always known is just Mexican, you know, or I'm just a Mexican American. Why people got to change it? Or some people are like, oh, well, back in the day, Chicanos was a dirty word, you know, it's like, you know, you're from the chicken coop. I've heard that before. You know, but, you know, some people need, which like, you know, like I don't like to be called chingon. I don't like to use the word chingon. And you know, even as I'm saying it, like something inside my mind is saying that I'm cussing online, you know what I mean? And people are going to reference this in the future. Right. And, but you know, I understand when people need to have identification, they need to identify, because for some people that work is their liberation, that is their decolonizing. But
I think the danger is too often we allow a colonized government to give us our identity. Absolutely. Instead of claiming what we as individuals or we as groups, as affinity groups, recognizes our identity. And I did, this was a little bit part of my doctoral research, was looking at how the government classifies Latinos, Hispanic people. And the very first time that the term or any term to recognize Mexican Americans was during the 1940 census. And if you know what was going on in the social political environment at that point was around World War II, where people, thought all these Mexican people are taking their jobs. And if you've heard about Mexican repatriation, where they actually deported over 500,000 Mexican Americans, many of whom were actually born in America, whatever that means, American citizens, which take that for whatever you think it is, but deported these people because of the political or the economic apprehension around people taking their jobs. And then it disappears from the U.S. Census until the 1970s when the Civil Rights Movement comes, and then it's Chicano. And then it starts evolving into Puerto Rican American and Mexican American and Central American. And so I think too often we allow the federal government or some other entity to dictate what we should be called, and then we just latch onto that term. And so I have refrained from taking an opinion on Latinx and Latinx.
Well, wait a minute. Why? Why is that?
Because
you can have an opinion.
Because I think that there are valid arguments on multiple sides of that discussion. For myself, I usually will say I'm a Latina, but if we really want to get into my identity, I am a Tejana. I am not a Texan. I do not identify as like American, Mexican American, because I feel like those are all colonized terms. Tejana is the closest I can get to recognizing where I was born, but also recognizing that my ancestors were from the global South Indigenous people. I'm also a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, enrolled in the in the sovereign nation, and have like my ID card and everything. So it's complicated, the issue of identity, and it's deeply personal.
Sure.
But when we start getting into these discussions around terminology, those are usually dictated by some formal government, like how are you classified? Which box do you check? And I'm saying we should reject the box.
Yeah, I agree. I think, part of the issue is that a lot of people identify with Latinx. They want to, right? Maybe it's a new term, kind of like how Chicano was at one point, right? There were some people who probably, like you mentioned and alluded to, they didn't want to be called Chicano or Chicana. And at that point, Chicanx wasn't around. How do you personally identify?
I have many identifications. In some spaces I am Latino, Latinx. I've always identified as a Chicano since I was a kid. But with the new terms and terminology, I always like to jump in with the younger generations and their identification. The Chicanx with the X in the beginning and the X in the end. X recognizing the Indigenous, and the X and the N opening it up for LGBTQ, which includes trans folks. And so I want to be inclusive. I want to practice and put that into practice on the daily. So I identify as Chicanx, but I'm also Indigenous, and I am an Indigenous, and I'm unapologetically Indigenous. You know what I mean? I am an Indigenous person all the time, right? It's not like I walk into a meeting or I walk into, I work for UT. I'm not like their UT Indigenous specialist, right? I am all the time Indigenous, right? And everything that I do. So someone had posted something on my page that said what I want to hear from Indigenous people. What do they have to say about today? And I was thinking I'm Indigenous all day, every day. So yeah, this is an everyday thing. Indigenous Peoples Day is every day for me, right? But I think that some of those terms are important because a lot of them come from, like I was saying before, they come from acts of liberation. The Chicano, the Chicana, and now the Chicanx, which is, a newer term for the Chicano generation, right? Came from that civil rights work. And a lot of our civil rights leadership, right, who have passed away, and some that still live and who are a lot older now, that were doing all that civil rights work in the late 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and even 1980s, had worked really hard for what they call in some spaces equity, but a lot of us know in the movement as liberation movements to call themselves Chicanos, Chicanas, Chicanx. And so we are the result of that ancestry. We are the tree and the seed that they planted, and we're the tree and the fruit that's bearing right now. I identify as Chicano, knowing that Mexican American, right, is a governmental title, a federal government title, because if you go to Mexico, right, that's just what they call that place. where the majority of the people in Mexico are indigenous, you know?
Yeah.
So it does, and someone asked me the other day, is that the same as North American indigenous? I'm like, yes.
Basically.
Yes. You know, right? Because the reason that it's North and South is because the government's put those lines, right? It's the Americas, you know? It's the land of the indigenous people. When Columbus fell onto the Taino people and began, you know, I heard somebody say this, when the indigenous people found the lost Christopher Columbus out at sea, they brought him in and they helped him, you know, get back. And he had met with the Taino people, which was Puerto Rico, right? Present day Puerto Rico. And so, you know, that's like, I lost where I was going.
That's all good. It's all good.
But the thing is it's clear that you've done the work to understand how you identified, to interrogate your own history, your individuality, and you can confidently say, this is how I identify, these are the reasons why, these are my communities that I claim and that claim me. I think to many folks, and I mean just in general, it's trendy, I guess. I mean, do you know how many times I've told people I'm an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and immediately they go, oh yeah, I'm Cherokee too.
Are you serious?
No, I know.
Every single time. And there's a process for gaining your citizenship in the sovereign nation of the Cherokee Nation. And so, and that's a global north. And that's a complicated thing too, because it is a sovereign nation, but it's also a sovereign nation organized like it is because of the colonization of the United States. Like, we were forcibly removed from our homelands and put in a place and enrolled and had to be categorized as such. But I agree with you. Like, I'm like, and as soon as people say, yes, I'm Cherokee too, then they say, like, how much are you?
Yeah.
How indigenous are you? And like with my tribe, it's based on descendancy. It's not based on blood quantum. Many tribes are based on blood quantum. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're just all methods to categorize people, usually a weapon of colonization. But my answer is always, like, I am Tejana all the time. I am Dr. Andrea 100% of the time. I'm 100% Cherokee and 100% Tejana. No matter the day, it's Tuesday, I'm 100% showing up. It's not just like, 50% or half my arm. People are like, oh, like, I did my DNA results and I'm 2% Native American. And it's like, okay, congratulations.
Yeah,
but
good job.
It's about connection and community, and how are you showing up, representing and being connected to all of that every day.
Absolutely. And part of the reason we have the discussion here at this table, and part of the reason we brought y'all, is because, like you talked about, you've done the work, you've been bold in the space, you show up every day with this identity, is because there are hundreds and thousands, and dare I say millions of our people inside these so-called borders that are still searching for their own answers, their own identity. They don't know any better. They have been lost, right? In a world of misinformation, miscommunication. Your history has been destroyed intentionally. And so maybe people do say Mexican American. Now, that's not a bad thing. If you out there and identify as Mexican American, hey, more power to you. But our people have rich histories, rich stories that has been dismantled for the most part, right? Many people think the history of San Antonio started 300 years ago. Right? There were people, our people were here long before in South Texas. Celebration. We did have a whole celebration, but
there's bumper
we're not going to
stickers
get
everywhere.
But we got to be careful, because those people who threw the celebration may be watching right now, and they may potentially fund this show.
I've told them 300. Oh yeah.
So Dr. Andrea knows, she's done the research. We've done the research. Y'all have probably done more research than I have personally. But listen, if you're out there doing your ancestry.com, good for you. Good for you. That's a place to start, perhaps, for you to get back and reclaim some of this identity that you may still be searching for. And it's a lifelong journey for some folks.
It's a data point.
It is. It is.
I'm a researcher, so data collection, right? There are lots of different sources of data to inform who you are. I think too many times we discount oral history. Like, I know the history of my family because it was told to me. I've been sort of disconnected from my global Northern American, the Cherokee Nation tribe, only because it was, there's assimilation that happens with a lot of tribes, but always knew the oral history of sort of how my family came to be where it was in Oklahoma. Have oral history from my Mexican American grandparents who came from Mexico. So I think those are also data points. Your ancestry.com is a data point. I don't think you can take one to say this is the end all be all. I'm 2%, because I'm like I did mine and I'm 2% like lots of other stuff, but I don't go around claiming that I am those things, because that's not where my community lives. Yeah. It's not part of the oral history of my family. So yes, I do. I'm not saying that, like, don't do your ancestry. Do it if you want to, but you should take all of that as in the aggregate and say this is and how I feel and where I show up, because I'm a person who has the identity that I have that lives in San Antonio. So just by default, I've grown up in a culture. Well, I've been here for 15 years, but I grew up in like south of Houston in a family and a culture that was very sort of traditional Mexican American. So all of these things inform who I am as I sit here today.
Yeah, and it's a proud culture as well. So it's not like saying, oh, I don't want to be Mexican. I don't like this country. Because someone's going to obviously look at this and say, oh my gosh, listen to these people. They hate this country. Like, no, it has nothing to do with that. But I do got a bone to pick because there's several trolls online that are upset that Columbus Day is no more. I mean, what is up with Christopher Columbus? What has he done for you? Why do you love Christopher Columbus so much? Because yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day, right? And as we talked about, every day is Indigenous Peoples Day. Every day is a day for us to come out and celebrate and honor our rich heritage and the culture that we have. But, yesterday has been reclaimed as Indigenous Peoples Day throughout many municipalities, many places around this country. And I just got to know, why are people so mad at that?
I mean, I think he's a symbol, right? I think it was a symbol that was created to placate a certain demographic at a certain time in history when there were conflicts about different things. And I'm not calling out any particular demographic, but it's the same reason we had Confederate statues. It was to reinforce and to protect white supremacy, right? It's to remind folks okay, maybe things are changing, but they're not changing that much. It's the same reason we still have a fiesta celebration. The Battle of Flowers, just happened to pop up right about the same time as those Confederate statues. So I don't think it's an accident, and that, we were just wanting to honor some kind of hero in Christopher Columbus or in the Confederate, generals, or in the heroes of the Alamo. I say heroes in air quotes. These are all things that are to protect whiteness and white supremacy.
For sure. And just to build on that, because I 100% agree. This is white people being comfortable. And people are angry at Indigenous Peoples Day because it makes white people uncomfortable. Well, guess what? America is ours, and this is our land, and we're in the major fight to bring it back. So when for me Indigenous People Days is trending, I'm cool with it because it makes white people uncomfortable. And it's important that white people are uncomfortable, because when anybody is uncomfortable, right? When anybody's uncomfortable, it makes them search for the things to make them feel better, and that only makes them a better person. We all know that as people who run, right? And I'm going back to this because I know the uncomfortability of running. Running a little bit sucks. It never goes away. The hard part, that's the hardest part about running, is getting started, and then when you're in it, it hurts, but when you're done, it feels great. But it took you that 6 miles first. It took you that first 6 miles to feel better about that 8 miles. It sucks. So when we're talking about white folks improving their understanding of racial justice and colorism, right? They got to be uncomfortable. There's no comforting way. You're going to cry. You're going to be angry. You're going to hate us because we're going to make you very uncomfortable because the indigenous history that we're fighting is being told through the eyes of colonizers and settler colonizers is not correct anymore. And we've known that since the beginning.
Dr. Camara Jones, she's a former president of the American Public Health Association, has done a lot of work in talking about racism as a public health issue. Yeah. And she has a quote that I love and I repeat often where she says, "I have abandoned my commitment to white comfort." Which is, that's it, right? She says the things that she says in talking about racism as a public health issue that, we used to say, you're Mexican American, you're at risk for diabetes because you're Mexican American. Oh, you're a black person in the United States, you're a black American, you're at risk for heart disease because you're a black American. It's not your race that makes you at risk. It's the racism that you face that makes you at risk. And therefore, she makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And so she says she has abandoned her commitment to white comfort. And that's not to say that, we hate all white people or anything like that, but it's just that we have to have these uncomfortable conversations and tell the truth and say the things that are true, whether it's public health or, anything, history, in order to have an honest conversation about how we got here and where we are, but then how do you move forward? Yeah. Because these things aren't going away.
And just to kind of comment on that, right? So, the registration of Indigenous people, right, and registering as people, right. There are several laws and groups that have made people have to do this work, and some Indigenous folks are very, like I know that some of the Indigenous folks in Minnesota are huge on blood quantum, and that's like for some of them it's protecting them and their tribes because they own the land and they take care of the land.
They have to.
They have to.
To retain their land claim, they have to maintain a certain level of blood quantum.
And so, but I've researched a little bit about my background history, and so my great-great-grandmother was a registered Kickapoo, right? So I'm originally from Del Rio, my grandmother being from Eagle Pass, a registered Kickapoo, but because of colonization and the racism around being Indigenous as an Indigenous person, my grandmother was forced to not register, and because of that, my people can't register anymore at all, right? So, unfortunately, I'm not a recognized Kickapoo. I'm not from the Kickapoo Nation, but I know it.
But that does not invalidate who you are.
Your truth, yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think that is a conversation that's being had in Native circles and Native communities. Primarily because there are so many people who claim indigeneity and who have no claim to it, right? And so, therefore, there's, okay, well, who is your community? Who claims you and who do you claim? Sort of prove who you are, but not to discount or diminish people's indigeneity, but to weed out these other folks that are they call them pretendians, people who are saying that, yes, I'm a Native person, who are capitalizing, especially like in like movie roles and like Hollywood and things like that, TV shows where they are taking indigenous roles or indigenous jobs, or getting jobs in universities based on inclusivity and diversity and inclusion rules, and saying, yeah, we're going to check this box because this person says that they're Indigenous when they're actually not. So I think that's a conversation I think within the Native community that outsiders don't really get to participate in, or should not be participating in, because that's kind of like it's in the family.
Yeah, it's
but
in-house.
I do want to say to folks who are paying attention to this, right? So like some of the work that has to get done is that research, right? And we mentioned this before, right? Not everybody's allowed to burn this endangered white sage, right? There's people who that have to protect this. This is part of their
sage that Maximo brought over here.
There's a way.
Go ahead and put it on the table. Put it in the middle. Let's talk about this. So for those folks that can see the table right here, what this is. I was at an event just before I came here, and there was two plates full of sage, a couple of bundles of sage, and I said, "Oh, let me grab it. I'm coming to the studio," and Dr. Andrea says, "You don't want to burn that," and I said, "Well, how come?" We just wanted to bless down the studio. We get a lot of people that come in and out of here, and some people have some negative energy, and we just like having good vibes in here. Many of our people in our spaces burn sage regularly for a lot of different reasons. And we talked about how some of this sage is not being farmed in.
I said, was it ethically sourced?
Was it ethically sourced? And I said, I didn't know, because I just got it from this event. But it doesn't look like it based on.
I mean, it's sort of like mass packaged, mass produced. Yeah.
Let me smell that.
Well, I mean, there's over harvesting of natural sources of the white sage. It's not being protected like it should, so that it can be used by Indigenous people for traditional ceremony. And so I think that this is an example of where it is mass produced and sort of packaged, and you can just kind of buy it literally like anywhere, in any kind of shop. You can buy it on Amazon. But if you really are looking at traditional ways of performing ceremony, learned from a teacher, someone who is giving you their teachings, this is probably not how you want to do it.
And then this is important to ecology, right? And whenever we are doing the Indigenous work, we are also honoring our Mother Earth, right? So things shouldn't be endangered because of over harvesting. We know that as Indigenous folks, but also just, if we want to take it to comfortability, right? We're human, you shouldn't be destroying the earth. Don't destroy the earth if you're a human, man. You live here. This is your home. But as indigenous people, we have a responsibility for earth and anything that we do with earth. And so if people are over harvesting sage, don't do it no more. Don't use this. There's other ways that you can, and I'm not going to tell you here. Learn it from your family, learn it from your people. Ask your grandmother. If you don't have a grandmother, then ask your elders. Go into the community and do that work and do that research, Why is it important for sage to be in your life? Ask yourself that question, Go do that research for your own bloodline and your own family.
But I also think that's true just on all levels of protecting resources, natural resources, water protectors. My good friend Jennifer Falcon, who has, been at Standing Rock, she's somebody that, and her daughters who are water protectors. It's indigenous people that are on the front lines of preserving and protecting what is left of, the resources that are available to us, because it is the connection, I think, that most indigenous people have to the earth. And they are not getting enough credit for being on those front lines. You've got climate change scientists here and this, but I think, the real work is done just doing the simple things like protecting water, protecting this kind of thing. These are the easy things, I think, the easy wins. Obviously, there's the large scale things like corporations and all of their carbon footprint, but I don't think that indigenous people get enough credit for the work that they're doing right now.
I'd agree. You also mentioned earlier, okay, where do we start with some of this stuff? Particularly, let's just take, for example, Columbus Day, since that day was yesterday.
Why are you so hung up on Columbus Day?
Because again, here's the thing. If we just use this basic thing, people don't want to hear the truth.
No.
They don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to know who Christopher Columbus really was. They don't want to know about,
they just want to eat their turkey on Thanksgiving.
They want to eat their turkey on Thanksgiving.
And they don't want to worry about what that means or how to explain it, because they just like their turkey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So before y'all came in the studio, we were having a discussion earlier.
Turkey.
Guylan mentioned, why are we so angry? Why are our people so upset? And I think just from a basic premise is that because why is there so much mystery over the truth? Right? Why can't we just tell it like it is, right? Why can't it just be really recognized for what it is? Amzai, who's out here, his show's coming up at 8:30 p.m. tonight. He mentioned he as a black man is learning of a new massacre every day from this country's history. Yeah. Every day he learns of a new massacre. And it's because our people were never told the truth. They don't want to know. It's not a nice thing to tell kids, right? And so we don't tell people who Christopher Columbus really was. And again, he was only one person, right? Yeah. There was millions and more. How many other sailors, right, had got told this story that they were these brave sailing the ocean blue, went to Australia, went to other parts of the Americas and conquered, right, and took slaves, and they were rapists and they were murderers. How come those people don't get the truth shine on them, and our people end up being the murderers and the rapists and
Dude,
all of
I'll
these
tell you why
other
we're
things?
angry, man. I'll tell you just plain out why we're angry. White supremacy. White supremacy is based in everything that we do in this country. Although we have the Sioux people who kind of helped to build the Constitution, white people and white supremacy made it what the rules of engagement in our country today.
But do you think that people really understand? When I say the word white supremacy, this is a topic that I have researched and I know it, right? This is part of the, I wrote in critical race theory before it was a topic, right? A thing, and so and people didn't know what it was. Now I say, I studied I'm a critical race scholar, and people are like, oh my God. But do you think that most people actually understand what we mean or what is meant by the term white supremacy, what that actually means?
Great point. The answer is no.
I don't think they do.
No, they don't.
Well, but people do understand it from some point. They do understand it from a little point. Like everybody that I've ever talked to on just a level of community and people that I talk to on a regular basis, all remember that one time when they realized that they were the color, that they cover their skin.
So you're talking about the perspective from a person of color, because here's the deal: is I talk to people about critical race theory, and I talk to people of color, I talk to brown people, I talk to black people, and they're like, okay, what is critical race theory? And you explain it to them, and they're like, well, duh, because it just explains their experience. Their lived experience of just being a black person in the United States or just being a Mexican American in Texas. They're like, of course, that's true. What I'm saying is, do you think that most people who are white people or Anglo people, or at least socialized as white people in the United States, understand what that means, because I think that most people will say, well, I don't have a Confederate flag on my truck.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
they don't.
I'm not a white supremacist, but they don't understand that they are participating in a system that was founded on white supremacy and that has been perpetuated in every single institution, from healthcare to education to economics to
Right.
politics to everything.
Yeah.
No,
you
they
know.
don't know. No, they don't know, right? And it's not my job is not to teach them. My job is to teach my people and that they understand. But they're right. But you're right.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a point where they're learning, and that's going to be the most uncomfortable part for them. But really, I mean, right now, I think, you know, I will collect white tears to do magic, but I won't spend too much time on them, right?
Yeah.
I'll make them happen. I'm talking about white tears. But my focus is going to be my people, my community, Black, brown, LGBTQ, people of color, communities of color, you know, poor people of color, communities. And so, you know, yeah, they don't. But, you know, I think most importantly, when I point to this camera that's not pointing at me, I'm pointing to the people who I know that are
It's
on.
a good profile, though.
There you go.
Yeah,
Hey,
got it.
that is. So I'm pointing to the people who are my friends, who have questions about the things that, about their own identification, who have questions about the work done in communities, critical race theory. That's for you. Those are for my people. I want the white folks to take it upon themselves to learn. Go do your own history, man. Go find out what's going on in the Norse country. Go find out what's happening in Iceland, or whatever, Europe,
Scotland,
or
Germany,
yeah,
Ireland.
yeah. I mean, you know, you said Scotland. I said Ireland. Ireland people identify more with the work that we've done.
That's not. I mean, we're assuming that we're not counting people who are white, who are also from like Mexico. I mean, there are
Sure,
white Mexicans,
sure,
there are white Central
sure.
Americans, there are people. So I don't think that everybody who is a white person is not from a you know, quote, Latin
Yeah.
American country.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
listen.
a whole other thing when
That's
you
a
get into
whole other
colorism.
deep
It's true.
conversation.
Yeah.
It's true. We're going to talk
Hey,
about
we can have that
colorism.
conversation with just San Antonio, man.
Yeah.
Come on, 300 years.
You know, somebody
300
we had
Canary
a
Islanders.
absolute we had a topic come across the table before we threw on the cameras a couple of weeks ago. I was talking about Ted Cruz, because a lot of people outside of Texas, we started talking about, you know, Texans, Latinos in Texas, and then they say, hey, what do you think about this Ted Cruz guy? I was in North Carolina, and there was a professor. His name was Dr. Louis Perez, and he asked me, he said, hey, what do you think about this Ted Cruz guy? Louis was Cuban. And so he threw that out. He threw that out because he knew all about Ted Cruz, right? Yeah. And I'm like, do people outside of Texas believe that there's a bunch of Ted Cruzes walking around? And then I thought, holy shit, there is.
When I was in California, that was a huge conversation.
Right?
That was a huge conversation. They were just like, well, y'all are from Texas, right? Y'all know what's happening out there. And they were just like, y'all need to relax. Y'all need to chill. And I was thinking, like, I can't argue against this because, you know, in California, folks have a whole different perspective because they don't have repressive laws on them all day, every day. They do have repressive laws that are happening to them, but it's not in comparison to what Texas is experiencing, right? It's just, it affects people's everyday personality. It affects the way that you walk, talk, shit. I mean, all of it, man. It's all part of it. And, you know, I couldn't even begin speaking on sexual reproductive health.
I was going to say, try being a woman.
I'm
or
saying, I
someone
can't even
who
speak
has,
on it.
I shouldn't say that. Try being someone who has a uterus in Texas and, you know, could possibly get pregnant at this point. And it's kind of terrifying.
It is.
Yeah, and as a mom, you know, I have a 21-year-old and a 14-year-old daughter. I have a 27-year-old and a 20-year-old son. You know, it affects both of them, and it's kind of apocalyptic in some ways.
Yep.
Because there are no good resolutions other than to vote. You know, not saying that voting is going to solve every problem, and I don't know that there's a huge difference between some policies. You know, the way that the political parties work out, but I do think that this is an issue that is a divide, the one that can be drawn across party lines, and it's pretty terrifying.
Yes, I agree, and you know, I do encourage the younger folks to vote, but also organize your communities, organize and educate your communities. You know, when we were talking about ACAB, right? A lot of folks would be like, "Well, what about brown cops? What about your own color of skin cops? How come you're gonna call them racist? And dude, they're participating in white supremacy by being a police officer, right? And so I have a problem with that, and I have a problem with police officers, and especially in San Antonio. They practice white supremacy, and they don't do the equity work that needs to be done. They don't do the uncomfortableness, and they're protected by law. They're protected by law to be as oppressive and repressive as they are, right? Killing people regularly or putting people in hospitals. And so, Ted Cruz is participating in white supremacy. Yeah. He 100% participates in white supremacy. It don't matter what his last name is. It don't matter where he comes from. You know what I mean? He's off the. He's not invited to the asada.
That's right.
After all, anymore. You know what I mean?
We made a trade. There's a trade alert. We'll trade Ted Cruz for who? Who can we trade him for? I don't know who. But here's the point I was going to earlier. Being a person of color, being indigenous, being Latino to a certain extent is more a lifestyle. It's a mentality. It's a way of life than it is your last name or your skin color, right? We have people that have last names like Cruz, like Rubio, like, Perez that aren't for us, man. They're not for, they would vehemently disagree with just about everything we're stating on this podcast. Now, to a certain extent, that may be okay, but when you're denying these fundamental facts and truths that we know, like racism, that is proven in many circles. It's been proven time and time again. Issues with women, reproductive health. I mean, what's going on here, man? Like, there's a sickness going on. Think about these things with mass shootings. These politicians in mass shootings, when there's no answer, it's thoughts and prayers, right? I mean, you hear these people, the talking points that they spit out when these things go on. I'm like, what? And then when you really break it down, they don't have a credible pot to piss in, but they just keep getting reelected.
I think you're giving them too much credit. I don't think Ted Cruz is smart enough to reason out that I'm participating in the system of white supremacy, which he is, or that I'm trying to uphold the status quo, or that I'm trying to protect my whiteness. I think he's in it just to purely benefit himself. Like there is just a personal enrichment that he is looking for. There's a lot of money in politics and fundraisers. He's trying to appease the people that support him and fill his campaign contributions. I think there's proximity to power. Which is related to proximity to whiteness in the United States. So, but I think we're giving them too much credit. If they're reasoning this out, this is their big strategy. I think they're just after money and power, in whatever form that looks like. And so that's why their values can change from day to day, the Herschel Walker situation, right? When it comes out that he's actually paid for abortions, but it's like, okay, well, we don't care. We just want control of the Senate.
Well, the people are going to vote for him anyway.
I mean, they'll vote for whoever protects their position, protects their level, their level of power, or whatever their perception of power is. So I do think that we're giving them too much credit. Now they're taking advantage of a system of white supremacy that has been established and built specifically to exclude people of color. But I don't think that they're like some big grand strategist. I think they just fell into a system and they learned how to game it.
I think you're right.
And so. Right. So I love what you're saying. So in that same light, I want to say that we should recognize some of the folks that are intentionally doing the work for Earth. We should recognize it. And you mentioned some of the people who are on the front line at Standing Rock, who are local San Antonio folks and indigenous people. I know that and there's tons of indigenous people. There's tons of black people doing intentional work to protect Earth, to protect them and their people, and to do that good work. And so when you say that they're not smart, that Ted Cruz isn't smart enough to participate, right? But when you think about the people who are participating in protecting the Earth and protecting their people, that's smart. Because
you have to do that work in order to be there. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. They just learned a system and how to game it. Like those of us that have been oppressed and marginalized have to figure out how to crack a system that was designed to intentionally exclude us. It's one of the things that I always say to students when I go talk to students at colleges, and it has the biggest impact, I think, is that, I tell those people, and I'm looking for the black and brown faces in the crowd, and I'm like, you are succeeding like you weren't meant to be here. You were succeeding in a system, whether it's, any university in the city that was created to exclude you. So the fact that you're here means you've already won. And the fact that, and I'm sure, and every one of them said, I felt lost. I felt like I didn't belong here. Thank you for saying that, because it's their experience that can be explained by Latino critical race theory, critical race theory, that it explains the experience of people in these systems that were meant to exclude them, whether it's policing or education or healthcare. Why do we have the worst maternal health outcomes among Black women in the United States, regardless of their educational level? Because healthcare was not meant to serve Black women. Latino women, different story. And there's lots of explanations for why, but these are systems that were meant to not just exclude, but harm and abuse, and not believe. So
that's why I think that's why I feel like it's important to. I'm tired of lifting up Ted Cruz's name, man. I don't want to lift him up no more. We talk. You could go and turn on mainstream media and see his name all over the place. Let's lift up people like Emma Tenayuca or Jovita Hidar, who did a lot of work for public health, and a lot of that what she did, creating some of the first zines or some of the first small printed magazines to teach women, especially Mexican American and Chicanas, or at the time it wasn't Chicanas because those were like 1940s, 1930s. About their health, about reproductive health, about sexual health, and because of that, she was a criminal.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And so I would rather lift Jovita Hidar up instead of Ted Cruz. I'll trade. White people can have him. I want Jovita Hidar. I want to lift her name up. I think we're spending too much time on repeating those white supremacist names. The power that they're hungry for, they're getting it every time we say their name.
Yeah.
I would rather lift up people like Rochelle Garza, who's running against Ken Paxton, the indicted attorney.
How is he allowed to run? Because these systems.
Because he's indicted but hasn't been tried and convicted. So
this is unreal.
Or like Michelle Vallejo, who's running against in that weird
that's been gerrymandered
district.
To hell.
Yeah, it runs from Seguin down to the border, right? And she's never run for office. So I'd rather lift up their names and give them play than these old time guys that keep perpetuating their bullshit.
We want to lift them up, and we talked about a little bit. Just reason we wanted to keep that conversation going is because today is the last day to register to vote in the state of Texas. And so, as we mentioned, there's many of our people who don't believe in the political process. They don't want to participate. They say our vote is a sham. It's all a wash. But I think that we should put our foot forward out there, because it's part of the fight. It's not the only fight that we have. It's not the only weapon, but it is one of them in this long game, right? If we could better the conditions for women, our children, trans women, people of color everywhere, we're going to need to put our foot in the circle, our ballot down to try to make some changes. Somebody's got to do something, because we're in a state of madness, just about anywhere. We're talking about legitimate culture wars, one side versus the other side. Even within our community, there was, what was this news that broke out of the Los Angeles City Council, right? You probably heard of this. Racist, anti-Indigenous, inflammatory comments, which we know exists in our community.
I was going to say, are we surprised? Because
no, we weren't.
I would venture to guess that if we're being honest, most of us have heard our tias, our tío, or grandma, whatever, say things like that. There is anti-Blackness that exists in the Latino community, in the Mexican American community, that has always existed. And I remember having a conversation with one of my elders and saying, why are you still saying that word? What, and the way that it was explained to me was back then it was better to be better than somebody, because then you weren't the lowest, right? Because it led to more jobs. It was proximity to whiteness. We're not as bad as that group of people. Even though we're subject to the same Jim Crow laws, we're subject, we couldn't serve on juries till 1954. They're all still the same types of systemic oppression, but at least in the immediacy of in an interaction, we weren't seen as bad as.
Absolutely. And so your point earlier, when you mentioned, I don't want to sound like, or we don't want to put this thought out there that we dislike all white people. No. Our people don't dislike white people. Our people love white people. Our people love white people so much. Our people love white people so much some of them wish they were white as well. Yeah. And that's how they picked up this sort of thing of being anti-black, anti-indigenous, anti-dark skin, brown people, right? I mean, that's where that shit came from. So it's not the belief that white supremacy, there is a supreme race. It is the idea that white people have a psychosis and have been trained and programmed to believe that they were better. And then if you were white, you were right in this country and you could get by having your name assimilated, right? So if your name was Maximo, you'd be Max and you'd be okay. But don't say you're Maximo. And if your name was Jesus, hey, you might as well change that to Jesse. Which again, if that's what you've done and that's what you want to do, that's your business, that's okay. But we have to be honest. We have to be truthful about some of the things that have happened in this country.
What if your name was Joaquin?
Then what are you going to change to, Joe?
No,
Watch
okay,
him? What is it?
What is
so
it?
my grandfather's name was Ascension Guerrero. And my grandmother's name was Joaquina. And Ascension and Joaquina.
Badass names.
Yeah, they're awesome. And my grandfather ran for city council in the town where I'm from in Alvin, Texas. And he anglicized his name. He was AJ Johnny Guerrero. But
Wow.
because Ascension Juan, but who for me he was Grandpa Chon. We just called him Chon. But nobody knew how to say the name Ascension. But in order to run for city council, he named it. He put on his little signs AJ Johnny Guerrero. And he didn't win city council, but he ran. And later in life, he would drive the little senior citizen van around, and he and my grandmother would go. And there was a lot of Caucasian Anglo people in my town, and they called them Johnny and Jackie.
Jackie.
But they didn't know how else to introduce themselves because they just couldn't say Joaquina because it's just too hard, right? And so they didn't try, so they were Johnny and Jackie, and I just thought it was hilarious until you get older and you thought that was really, really offensive. When we were younger, it was a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, but now it's okay, that sucked really bad.
And maybe it was a survival thing as well,
Yeah.
right? Because let's be honest, folks, 40, 50 years ago, you get your ass whipped just because your skin was too dark. You could be lynched.
Spanish.
You could be lynched for being a black person in certain municipalities, right? Around,
You could be lynched
around
for
this
being a
country.
Mexican by the Texas Rangers. in
Absolutely.
Texas.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So many of our people, look, if you change your name, if your family's last name had to be changed or anglicized, whatever, to fit in this country, maybe it was a survival tactic. But the thing is now we got the freedom to be who we want to be now. I would like to believe we can put that foot forward and proclaim who it is that we want to be.
I mean, I do that. I mean, people, I'm in meetings all the time, and people, you have to go around to introductions, and I'm very intentionally, my name is DrAndrea Guerrero Guajardo.
And you say it like in Spanish.
I say it like that. Yeah. And they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, come on, figure it out. If you can't say it, I'm sorry, that's on you.
I'm glad that you said that. Yeah, I love that.
I mean, you have to.
I always introduce myself as Joaquin Muerte, and even in institutional spaces, because for one, right, there's value in the nickname, right? The minute that you introduce yourself in a way that is not what people are used to, people will immediately add value to who you are. I don't have a degree. I'm actually a dropout, right? And so whenever I'm working in institutional spaces, I'm surrounded by doctors all the time. So when everybody's just like, oh, I'm Dr. blah, blah, blah. I'm Dr. blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, I'm Joaquin Muerte. And people are just like, but immediately it adds a little value to who I am. So then people come up and say, where'd you get that name? Oh, you're interested in who I am, right? Why aren't you interested in all these doctors over here, right? So I like to kick the door in with a little value, and then I teach people about the history of my work, and then work community organizing, social justice work, and then every once in a while I throw in the conversation about my podcast, and people, their ears perk up, conversations get flowing, and I have real conversations with doctors that or even directors, or even other people who might be working in really big nonprofits or even whatever. I have these conversations with people because nobody ever asks them about that stuff. They want to talk about their research, their experience, and that's all who these doctors are, right? And so, for me, kicking my name off as Joaquin Muerte always kicks it off. Like, it adds a little value to the conversation, But my name is Joaquin Abrego, right? My actual name is Raul Joaquin Abrego. But that my last name too, Abrego, is more from the San Patricios. I'm a card-carrying, recognized San Patricio. My family has a lineage of Irish Mexican.
Yeah.
So, even the last name Abrego perks up ears because people are just like, where's that name come from? I never heard that. Well, it's actually O'Brien, but it was turned into Abrego so that the Irish people can fight in the Mexican War because they sided with Mexican people to free black slaves. And while Texas was wanting to keep the slave. And so that's why I align really heavy with Irish folks and Irish resistance and that work that they did out there.
Well, I'm very intentional about making sure that people understand my level of education because I have literally been mistaken for what they, are you a secretary? Which who uses the word secretary anymore? No, when I was faculty at a university here in this city, one of the other white male faculty members asked if I was the new secretary because I just happened to be standing by the copy machine and I had to introduce myself as a faculty member because this is not what most people envision when they think doctor. Whether physician, doctor, PhD doctor, EDD doctor, whatever, doctor of whatever, because Latinas are very underrepresented in the number of doctorates that are given out in the United States. So, yeah, I think representation matters.
Totally.
Absolutely. And Dr. Andrea is stealing the show. We've got a lot of people chiming in. Janie, the Latina CEO, says, I love it. We've got Irene
Janie
says.
Janie is a boss. Janie is a trustee of CPS board. So
she's a boss.
She is a CEO of Webhead.
She's coming on next week. I'm just
okay.
kidding, but we're speaking into existence.
Yeah. She will come. She will give you her opinion. She is not shy.
We've got Irene Chavez who says, well said. We got another one that says, great points. And we've got the boss, another boss, Armando Tejeda, chiming in. He says, hey, great presentation. Exactly. We got a little bit of everyone. Those are some folks we have. We know in town. We've got other folks all throughout the U.S., all overseas, chiming in and watching viewers. We appreciate your viewership. I want to talk quickly.
I paid those people to...
She paid them to watch. Well, that's how she gets her followers, so it doesn't matter. And you all are, hey, listen, one of the things we didn't get into right away is your all's impressive resumes, the bios. One of the things I wanted to talk about is...
My resume is available upon request, if anybody wants. I'm just kidding.
You don't got to pay for it. We'll find it. We'll find it. But we're going to, on Twitch, you can tip.
Oh.
You can do a tip, so people can tip us right now on Twitch, which the show's on Twitch, I believe. Really quickly.
Tip me on Twitch, y'all.
Our people are deeply spiritual people, right? In a lot of different ways. We talked a little bit about sage. We talked about just a little bit about karma. We didn't really talk about it, but kind of going in there. Joaquin, you have a podcast, Chicanx versus Aliens, where you deeply get into, all things spiritualness, I would say, right? Sure. Tell us a little bit about it. We've only got a couple minutes left in the show, but I want to get into that because, man, you're an interesting dude. But I think you speak on behalf of a lot of our people who are afraid to talk about these. They be ostracized as weird. They've had these weird experiences, but you're bringing to light some of these really ingrained, topics that are in our culture, man.
So most importantly, I like to lift up the voices of my people, Black and Brown, LGBTQ. That's why it's called Chicanx versus Aliens. And I think that the kind of the topic of aliens is a lot of people have questions about, right? But if you've ever been abducted by a UFO or been abducted by an alien, if you've ever seen a ghost or have had some kind of paranormal experience, I'd like to have a conversation with you because I don't think that we're crazy for having that. Indigenous people, us as an Indigenous people or have history of Indigenous people, talk to spirits all the time. Whenever we're having a tough time, we call in our grandparents, and so whenever people are just like, there's a ghost in my house, how do I sage it away? It's like, that might be your relative, brother or sister. That might be somebody really trying to get to you. Don't kick them out.
First.
Put out a tamale or a shot of tequila for them.
Hey, Dia de los Muertos is coming up. Maybe they're early.
Yeah.
Maybe they're early.
Well, they've been around for all year for me, right? I got a regular haunt in my house. That's just my for me. It's like I'd like to uplift the voices of my Black and Brown people so that we don't feel crazy. We're not crazy. We're just very spiritually connected, and just because we're talking and thinking out of the box doesn't make us crazy. I do that. That's why I have my podcast, but also I'm super interested in whether you've seen ghosts or UFOs or aliens and that kind of thing.
Have you ever been abducted by an alien?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Do we got enough time?
I don't know.
Give us the cliff notes. Give us the cliff notes.
When I was
recently?
No,
Okay.
well, I mean, several times, right? But
Okay.
when I was 9 years old, I had an experience. I saw a glowing blue man, and or a glowing blue person, and then I had a lapse in time, and ever since then I've been seeing ghosts, shadows, having sleep paralysis. I have a connection to owls. For a little while I was healing people without me wanting to, like before the age of 13. And then growing up, I've had a series of several dreams of abductions, and I've been really tied and connected to other people who had UFO abductions and UFO connections or connections to space and green lightning and all kinds of stuff, and have made really good friends and with that community. There's I think a lot of people who are into paranormal or into UFOs, their first thing is being skeptic. But people who have had the experience, right, can't help but be against skepticism because they've had the personal experience. So, to this day, owls come to visit me at home. I still have sleep paralysis, and I've taught myself how to astral project because I've been able to talk to my sleep demons and the demons that have come to me. I mean, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it goes on and on and on. It gets deeper, deeper, deeper. If you ever want to check out my podcast.
This is a subject I have not touched in all of my research on anything.
But do you want to?
I mean, I'm open. I'm open to
She's
learning
here.
more about everything. Yeah.
So did they find?
Chicanx Resilience podcast.
I'm on it.
Did they find the chupacabra on the southeast side over the other day?
Well,
did you see this?
Did you see this? You saw that
I mean, what is it? Is it fake?
Well, no, it's not
like
fake.
a dog with a baby arm.
It didn't look like no dog.
With
That's what I'm saying. And so that for me, that this is the when people approach me, I immediately got sent this picture the moment that it happened, right? Because people are just like, Joaquin's the dude. Like he's the one that I'll bring it up and talk about it. And so they told me, it's cool to post it. I can't mention the school where it was posted because my friends work there, but my friend was the one that got a connection for this picture.
So you're 2 degrees away from the person who actually found it.
1
1 degree.
degree. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't know the person who actually found it, but they are the janitor of a friend of mine, right? So my friend was there with the janitor, took the picture, sent it to me. But all the janitors were having this conversation that they had been hearing stuff coming around the school. They had been noticing that they were seeing dead creatures around the school, and then they noticed that there was like a crazy smell happening somewhere in the school, and it was starting to go into the school. So they had to really rush to find it so no kids could get sick. When they finally found the creature, it was this crazy looking, bigger than normal dog with a baby hand. It had a hand that kind of
that was no dog.
Okay, so have you ever seen a dog die? Have you ever seen a dog die, right?
Yeah.
When they die, they're like, right?
Yeah,
Their feet are thrown up.
They don't go crick.
This thing was curled up
Yeah.
if it was like it died in comfort or something. Like it died kind of like. But even when dogs lay down like this, right? But they don't ball their hands like this.
No.
Which is why
dogs don't have hands.
Yeah, the
Pause.
dog had a balled up fist, and
it
so
had like a bicep and stuff.
it had a bicep,
It was
dude.
weird.
And that way, none of that is doctored. None of that picture is doctored, right?
It looked real.
This is a picture from an actual person on southeast side.
How have we covered all of these topics?
We're going
today,
to cover
August?
one more. Dr. Andrea, you get the last words in 10
What?
seconds or less.
What?
Take it home for us, girl.
I mean, thank you for having us. I mean, I think these are the conversations that we have outside, at the asadas or around the tamalada, and we talk about these things, and we should keep talking about these things. I have a ton of friends you could have all of the Latina Leadership Institute, all of my colleagues there could come on, and there's just such a wealth of talent and expertise in this city. Yeah. I think there are a lot of topics that I think you should cover. I'll give you a list.
We want those topics, and we want all those chingonas right at this table. Thank you
They're
so
all
much, folks.
chingonas.
We're over on our time. Catch us next week where I'm interviewing the chupacabra himself. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Gylan, take it home.
The chupacabra.